A bitterly cold evening, one man standing alone at a bus stop, a patrol car slowing to a predatory crawl. It was a scene that unfolded countless times across America, but on this night the officer had chosen the wrong target. He believed he was arresting a nameless, defenseless suspect. He had no idea that he had just forcefully handcuffed one of the district's most formidable, high-ranking federal prosecutors. This is the story of an unlawful arrest, a destroyed badge, and a $4.7 million mistake. Desmond Carrington was a man who dealt in the currency of control. At 42, he served as deputy chief of the Violent Crimes and Racketeering Section at the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts. He had spent the day methodically dismantling a multi-million-dollar money laundering organization before a federal judge. His suit had been perfectly pressed, his arguments razor-sharp, and his authority absolute. When Desmond spoke, FBI special agents took notes. When he frowned, defense attorneys reconsidered their plea agreements. He was protected by the immense and intimidating power of the federal government. But even the federal government could not repair a dead alternator. Deep inside the underground parking garage beneath the federal courthouse, Desmond turned the key in his normally dependable Audi A6. Instead of hearing the engine start, he was met by the rapid, agonizing click of a dead battery. He sighed and rested his forehead against the leather steering wheel. The day had been an exhausting marathon of cross-examinations, legal arguments, and private conferences with the judge. He was completely drained. A tow truck would take far too long. Desmond decided to leave the car behind, ride the subway for several stops, and catch the Route 66 bus for the remainder of the journey to his home in Brookline. Before leaving the office, he had removed the armor of his profession. His tailored Tom Ford suit jacket, silk tie, and crisp dress shirt were folded neatly inside his leather messenger bag. In their place, he wore a faded gray Harvard Law hoodie, dark sweatpants, and a black wool beanie pulled low against the brutal wind. He looked nothing like the legal titan who had commanded a federal courtroom earlier that day. He looked like an ordinary, exhausted man trying to get home. The wind rolling in from the Charles River was vicious. Desmond stood at a poorly illuminated bus stop near a changing neighborhood that existed somewhere between wealth and urban decay. The streetlights flickered overhead, throwing long, uneven shadows across the icy pavement. He checked his phone and saw that the bus was running late. Desmond pushed his hands deep into the pockets of his hoodie and shifted his weight from one foot to the other, trying to stay warm. Each breath formed a pale cloud in the freezing air. Several blocks away, Officer Randall Keene was drinking lukewarm coffee and nursing an increasingly bitter mood. Keene was a veteran patrol officer whose career had stalled because of a long history of citizen complaints that had been quietly buried by his department. He had become cynical, restless, and deeply irritated by his assignment. A series of residential burglaries had recently occurred in the area. The description distributed by dispatch was dangerously vague, the kind of description that encouraged careless policing rather than thoughtful investigation. The suspect was described only as a tall black man wearing dark winter clothing. In a major American city on a freezing evening, that description could apply to an enormous number of innocent people. But Keene was not interested in nuance. He wanted an arrest that would satisfy his lieutenant. Keene turned his cruiser onto the avenue. The street was nearly empty except for an occasional passing vehicle and a solitary figure standing beside a bus shelter. His eyes narrowed. He slowed the cruiser until its heavy tires crunched through the frozen slush. Keene studied the figure, a tall black man wearing a dark hoodie and a beanie, his hands concealed inside his pockets as he stood beneath the shadows. To Desmond Carrington, the approaching headlights belonged to another passing vehicle. Then the cruiser slowed. Without warning, a blinding spotlight struck Desmond directly in the face. He squinted and raised a gloved hand to shield his eyes. The vehicle was a police interceptor, its engine idling with a low and threatening growl. Desmond felt irritated, but he was not afraid. Why would he be? He was a senior officer of the federal court. He assumed the patrol officer was conducting a routine inquiry and might ask whether he had witnessed anything unusual. The driver's door opened. Officer Keene stepped out with one hand resting casually but deliberately on the grip of his holstered weapon. The heavy impact of his boots against the pavement broke the silence. "Hey," Keene called, his voice carrying the sharp edge of practiced authority. "Step out of the shelter. Keep your hands where I can see them." Desmond did not move immediately. His legal mind began analyzing the encounter automatically. This appeared to be a Terry stop, an investigative detention. Under the Fourth Amendment, an officer needed reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime had occurred, was occurring, or was about to occur. Standing at a bus stop was not a crime. "I said take your hands out of your pockets and step into the light," Keene barked as he moved closer. Desmond slowly removed his hands, making certain that his palms were open and empty. He stepped forward into the harsh spotlight. "Officer," Desmond said, his voice calm, measured, and entirely free from the panic Keene expected to hear. "I am waiting for the Route 66 bus. It should be arriving soon. Is there a problem?" "I'll ask the questions," Keene snapped. He stopped a few feet away and aimed a heavy flashlight directly into Desmond's eyes, even though the cruiser's spotlight already illuminated the area. "What are you doing out here?" "I just told you, I'm waiting for the bus," Desmond answered. His tone remained controlled, though frustration had begun to settle deep inside his chest. "My car broke down downtown." "You live around here?" "In Brookline," Desmond replied. "Do you have identification?" Keene demanded. This was the turning point, the moment when the law separated citizens from subjects. Desmond knew the state statutes perfectly. A person could be required to identify himself only when an officer possessed reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Yes, Desmond was a black man wearing a hoodie, but he was also a man who had devoted his career to defending the Constitution. He decided to establish the legal foundation of the encounter. "Officer," Desmond said politely but firmly, "before I reach into my bag for identification, would you please explain what reasonable suspicion you have for detaining me? Am I suspected of committing a crime?" The question hung in the freezing air. To Desmond, it was a standard procedural inquiry. To Officer Randall Keene, it was an unforgivable act of disrespect. Keene's jaw tightened. The change in his posture was immediate. His casual arrogance hardened into open hostility. In Keene's world, people on the street did not use phrases such as reasonable suspicion. Those who did were either self-proclaimed legal experts or people searching for an argument. Keene despised both. "I don't have to give you a law lesson, buddy," he sneered, stepping closer and invading Desmond's personal space. The smell of stale coffee and peppermint gum clung to the officer's breath. "We've had burglaries in this area. You match the description. Now you're going to show me your identification or I'm taking you in for obstruction. Your choice." Desmond's thoughts moved rapidly. "You match the description." It was one of the oldest and most legally fragile excuses used in street policing. A vague description did not give officers unlimited authority to detain every person who shared the suspect's race and gender, especially when that individual had done nothing suspicious. Desmond knew that this conversation would not be occurring if he were a white man wearing a business suit. "I understand that you are performing your duties, officer," Desmond said, carefully controlling his voice and avoiding sudden movements. "But standing at a designated public transit stop is not suspicious conduct. I am declining your request for identification as permitted by the Fourth Amendment, and I would like to know whether I am free to leave." He held Keene's gaze. "Am I free to go?" Those were powerful words in a courtroom. They established whether a person had been legally seized. Keene's face darkened with anger. He was not accustomed to being calmly outmaneuvered on a sidewalk. He understood fear, immediate compliance, and open aggression. He knew how to answer all three with force. Desmond's cold, clinical resistance infuriated him. "You're not going anywhere," Keene growled. Without warning, he lunged forward and seized Desmond's upper arm with a bruising grip. Desmond gasped in shock. Instinctively, his muscles tightened. "What are you doing? Do not touch me." "Stop resisting," Keene shouted. The phrase came automatically, designed for the officer's body camera and any potential witnesses. Keene yanked Desmond forward, spun him around, and slammed him chest first against the freezing plexiglass wall of the bus shelter. The impact drove the air from Desmond's lungs. The physical violation and overwhelming humiliation sent adrenaline surging through his body. His cheek pressed against the dirty, ice-cold glass. From the corner of his eye, he saw the Route 66 bus finally approaching. Its pneumatic brakes hissed as it stopped nearby. The doors opened. Several passengers stared in horrified silence at the scene before them. A police officer violently restraining a black man in a hoodie. "I am not resisting," Desmond said loudly, ensuring that the officer's microphone recorded every word. He deliberately relaxed his body and offered no physical opposition. Desmond knew the statistics. He knew how quickly an officer's bruised ego could transform an ordinary sidewalk into a crime scene. He would fight this encounter, but not on the street. He would fight it in the arena he controlled. Keene kicked Desmond's legs apart and searched him with unnecessary aggression. "Do you have a weapon? Needles? Anything that could hurt me?" "I have no weapons," Desmond answered, his voice muffled against the glass. "You are making an unlawful arrest. I am advising you to stop." "Shut your mouth," Keene spat. He removed his handcuffs. The cold steel closed tightly around Desmond's wrist, painfully pinching his skin. The locking mechanism clicked through the silent street. Desmond Carrington, the man who had authorized surveillance against international drug traffickers and carried the direct telephone number of the United States Attorney General, was now handcuffed like a common vagrant. Keene seized the thick leather strap of Desmond's messenger bag and tore it from his shoulder. Then he marched him toward the patrol cruiser. "You wanted a law lesson?" Keene muttered as he opened the rear door. How about a lesson in respect? He placed a heavy hand on Desmond's head and shoved him into the cramped plastic back seat. The door slammed shut, trapping Desmond inside the suffocating darkness of the cruiser. The interior smelled of old sweat, vomit, and industrial disinfectant. Each movement caused the handcuffs to cut more deeply into his wrists. Through the metal partition, Desmond watched Keene walk confidently toward the driver's seat, clearly proud of what he considered proactive police work. Keene climbed inside, lifted the radio microphone, and contacted dispatch. He reported that he had detained a man who matched the burglary suspect's description. He described Desmond as uncooperative and announced that he was transporting him to the precinct for booking. Dispatch acknowledged the report. Keene looked into the rearview mirror, wearing a smug and satisfied grin. I hope you didn't have any important plans tonight, counselor. Desmond sat silently in the darkness. The initial shock faded, replaced by a cold and calculating fury. He met Keene's eyes in the mirror. He did not yell. He did not curse. Officer, Desmond said softly, his voice carrying the certainty of a judge imposing a life sentence. You have no idea what you have just done. Keene laughed, placed the cruiser in gear, and drove toward the station. The journey to the precinct became an exercise in psychological endurance. Keene deliberately took corners too sharply, throwing his handcuffed passenger from side to side across the slippery plastic seat. Desmond braced himself as well as he could and refused to give the officer the satisfaction of hearing him complain. Instead, he recorded everything in his mind: the sequence of events, the streets they passed, the officer's badge number, which he had memorized as soon as the spotlight struck him, and the precise language of Keene's threats. Desmond's mind was a steel trap, constructing a federal civil rights lawsuit one meticulous piece at a time. The cruiser entered the precinct's secure garage, heavy steel doors closed behind it. Keene dragged Desmond from the back seat by the chain connecting the handcuffs. The movement sent sharp pain through Desmond's shoulders. Walk, Keene commanded. He shoved Desmond through reinforced doors and into the chaotic booking area beneath harsh fluorescent lights. The precinct smelled like desperation. Telephones rang constantly. Officers shouted across the room. Recently arrested people spoke in low, defeated voices. Behind the elevated wooden booking desk sat Sergeant Vernon Pike, an exhausted, overweight desk officer who appeared to be counting the days until retirement. What do we have? Pike asked without looking away from his computer monitor. I caught our prowler from the heights, Keene announced proudly, stopping Desmond in front of the desk. I saw him loitering at the bus stop. He matched the description perfectly, refused to identify himself, became argumentative, and started quoting the Constitution. I'm charging him with obstruction and resisting. The detectives can determine whether he's connected to the burglaries. Pike sighed and finally looked up. He studied Desmond's beanie, hoodie, and handcuffs. All right, put him against the wall. Empty your pockets. Keene searched Desmond roughly, removing his keys, chewing gum, and cell phone. Then he seized Desmond's expensive leather messenger bag and emptied it carelessly across the booking counter. A neatly folded Tom Ford suit jacket fell out, followed by a silk tie, several legal pads filled with dense handwritten notes, and a thick leather credential wallet. Take off his beanie, Pike instructed. Keene snatched the wool hat from Desmond's head, disturbing his closely cropped hair. Desmond stared straight ahead, his expression carved from stone. He was playing the long game. Had he shouted about his position, they might accuse him of attempting to use federal authority to escape what they claimed was a lawful arrest. No, Desmond would allow the system they abused so casually to crush them under its own weight. Name? Pike asked, his fingers positioned over the keyboard. Desmond remained silent. Hey, Keene barked. He struck the back of Desmond's head with an open hand, a casual, degrading blow. The sergeant asked you a question. Desmond slowly turned toward Keene. The intensity in his eyes was so profound, yet so completely free of fear, that the officer unconsciously stepped backward. I am invoking my right to remain silent, Desmond told Sergeant Pike clearly. I will not answer any questions. I want my telephone call. Pike rolled his eyes. Another amateur lawyer? Fine. Put him in holding cell 3. I'll inventory his property. Keene seized Desmond's arm and led him away from the booking desk down a dirty hallway covered in faded green tile. He shoved Desmond into a small, foul-smelling cell containing a metal bench and a toilet without a lid. Keene removed the handcuffs through the bars and slammed the iron door shut. The deadbolt closed with a final metallic crash. Make yourself comfortable, Keene said through the bars. You're going to be here for a while. Desmond rubbed his bruised, reddened wrist. He sat on the cold metal bench, closed his eyes, and waited. Back at the booking desk, Sergeant Pike was irritated. He hated processing the belongings of uncooperative suspects because it created additional paperwork. He began sorting through the items scattered across the counter. He recorded the expensive cell phone and the keys. He picked up the Tom Ford jacket, noticing the exceptional quality of the fabric. Those were unusual belongings for a suspected burglar, he thought, though he did not examine the contradiction closely. Finally, Pike picked up the heavy leather wallet. It was not an ordinary billfold. It was thicker and secured by a brass snap. Pike opened it, expecting to find a driver's license that would identify their unnamed detainee. Instead, he saw gold. A heavy, intricately designed gold shield gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights. Stamped in gold lettering across the leather were the words, United States Department of Justice. Pike stopped breathing for a moment. His heart seemed to skip a beat. His hands trembled as he opened the opposite side of the credential holder and revealed the identification card. The photograph showed the same man currently sitting inside holding cell 3. Beside the photograph, bold letters identified him as United States Department of Justice. Desmond Carrington, Assistant United States Attorney, Deputy Chief Violent Crime Section. The color vanished from Sergeant Pike's face. Cold sweat gathered across his forehead. He stared at the credentials as though he were holding a live grenade after the pin had been removed. Assistant United States Attorneys occupied the highest levels of the legal system. They did not merely prosecute individual criminals. They prosecuted police officers and police departments. They investigated civil rights violations. They possessed the authority to initiate federal inquiries capable of dismantling precincts, ending the careers of police chiefs, and sending corrupt officers to federal prison. The man in the photograph was not an inexperienced junior prosecutor. He was a deputy chief. Oh, dear God, Pike whispered. He looked toward the arrest report. Keene had begun entering into the adjacent computer. The report stated that the suspect matched the description, refused to identify himself, and resisted arrest. It was standard language used to justify a questionable stop. Pike knew it. Every officer in the building knew it. But Keene had used those familiar lies against a man who taught seminars about exposing those exact tactics in federal court. Keene, Pike shouted, his voice cracking with panic. He rose so quickly that his office chair rolled backward and struck a filing cabinet. Randall Keene, get out here immediately. Keene walked from the break room carrying a fresh cup of coffee, visibly annoyed by the shouting. What's wrong, Sergeant? Is the guy causing trouble? Pike said nothing. He pointed a trembling finger toward the open credential wallet resting on the desk. Keene approached with a smirk. What did he steal, a credit card or? His voice disappeared. He looked at the gold shield. Then he read the identification card, the title, and the federal seal. The coffee cup slipped from Keene's hand and shattered against the linoleum. Dark liquid splashed across his polished boots. The silence in the booking area became overwhelming. Only the steady dripping of spilled coffee could be heard. Tell me you didn't put your hands on him, Pike whispered. Tell me you asked him to come here voluntarily. Keene stared at the badge as his aggressive facade crumbled. He remembered slamming Desmond against the bus shelter. He remembered tightening the handcuffs. He remembered striking the back of Desmond's head. I handcuffed him, Keene stammered. I put him in the cruiser. I told him to keep his mouth shut. Pike closed his eyes and rubbed his temples as a crushing headache spread behind them. The precinct was finished. They were all finished. Call the captain, Pike said. Wake him, call the chief, call everyone. What do we do about the man? Keene asked desperately, pointing toward the holding area. Should I release him? Should I apologize? Do not go anywhere near that cell, Pike roared, his terror transforming into rage. Do not speak to him. Do not even look at him. You have brought the full wrath of the federal government down on this department. Inside holding cell 3, Desmond Carrington sat in the darkness, listening to the muffled panic echoing along the hallway. He leaned his head against the cold concrete wall. A grim smile finally appeared on his face. The trap had closed. Now the real work would begin. Captain Preston Mallory valued his sleep. At 58, he was approaching a comfortable retirement and dreaming of a quiet life in Florida. When his bedside telephone rang in the middle of the night, he answered with the irritated voice of a man accustomed to being awakened over intoxicated suspects in minor domestic disputes. Soon afterward, Mallory was racing along the frozen interstate in his unmarked Ford Explorer. His emergency lights flashed silently into the darkness, and his heart pounded violently against his ribs. When he entered the precinct, the atmosphere was suffocating. The building felt less like a police station and more like a bunker awaiting an artillery strike. Sergeant Pike paced behind the booking desk, sweating heavily. Officer Randall Keene sat on a metal folding chair in the corner, staring at the linoleum floor as though trying to memorize every pattern in the tile. "Where is he?" Mallory demanded. He did not ask for an explanation. Pike had already described the catastrophic situation over the telephone. "Holding cell 3, Pike answered, extending a ring of heavy brass keys with shaking hands. "He hasn't made a sound. He hasn't requested an attorney. He hasn't asked for a telephone call." "Of course he hasn't asked for an attorney," Mallory hissed as he snatched the keys. "He is the attorney. He prosecutes cartels and corrupt politicians. He is sitting in there, building a federal indictment inside his head." Mallory turned toward Keene. "You will not move. You will not speak. You will not contact your union representative or call your family. You will breathe only when I tell you to breathe. And if I discover that you erased your body camera footage, I will personally destroy what remains of your career." Mallory straightened his uniform, drew a deep breath, and walked down the green-tiled hallway. The air seemed colder as he approached the holding cells. He stopped before cell 3. Through the rusted bars, he saw Desmond Carrington sitting perfectly still on the metal bench, his hands resting on his knees. Desmond looked up, his expression completely unreadable. "Mr. Carrington," Mallory began, forcing diplomacy into his strained voice, "there has been an enormous misunderstanding. I am Captain Preston Mallory, the commanding officer of this precinct. I am opening this door, and you are free to leave with our deepest apologies." His hands shook as he searched for the correct key. The deadbolt clicked, and the iron door opened with a long, metallic screech. Desmond did not stand. He made no movement toward freedom. He simply remained on the bench, his dark eyes fixed on Mallory. "Captain Mallory," he said, his voice smooth, resonant, and terrifyingly calm. "Are you reversing my arrest?" Mallory swallowed. "Yes, sir, you are completely free to leave. We will have an officer take you home or anywhere else you need to go." "I see," Desmond replied slowly. "Under what legal authority was I detained, transported, and confined inside this cage?" "It was a mistake, sir. The officer—" "A mistake is a typographical error on a parking citation," Desmond interrupted with chilling politeness. "What your officer committed was an unlawful seizure under the Fourth Amendment, a deprivation of civil rights under color of law and violation of federal statute and felony battery." His voice remained controlled. "He detained me without reasonable suspicion, arrested me without probable cause, and physically assaulted me because I asked him to explain the legal basis for his actions." Mallory wiped sweat from his forehead. "Mr. Carrington, please come into my office. We can get you coffee and return your belongings." "I am not entering your office," Desmond said as he finally rose. He stepped into the light, and Mallory winced when he saw the deep red marks left by the handcuffs and the bruise developing along Desmond's cheek where it had struck the bus shelter. "I want my release processed formally," Desmond ordered as he entered the hallway. "I want a copy of the booking record showing when I was brought into this building. I want the property receipt. I want the computer-aided dispatch log connected to the initial stop. And I want the badge number of the officer who assaulted me." He moved closer to the captain. "I will not quietly leave through a rear entrance while your department attempts to bury what happened." Mallory knew he had no acceptable option. Providing those documents meant handing Desmond the evidence he would use against the department in civil court. Refusing would escalate an already explosive situation involving a senior federal prosecutor. "Of course," Mallory conceded, his shoulders sinking. "The desk sergeant will prepare everything immediately." Soon afterward, Desmond stood before the booking desk. He methodically dressed himself, putting on his Tom Ford suit jacket, straightening his collar, and returning the gold Department of Justice badge to his leather bag. The transformation was striking. The man who had been treated like a powerless street suspect now looked like someone capable of commanding entire institutions. Sergeant Pike handed him a stack of documents with trembling hands. Desmond read every line before folding the pages neatly and placing them inside his jacket. Then he looked towards Officer Keene, who remained seated in the corner, pale and visibly shaking. "Officer," Desmond said. The room fell completely silent. "In my profession, I encounter many dangerous men, but those who hide behind a badge so they can bully people on the street are the ones I most enjoy prosecuting." His gaze never moved from Keene. "Find an excellent attorney." Without another word, Desmond Carrington turned and walked through the precinct's front doors, disappearing into the freezing night. By morning, the city remained unaware of the legal earthquake about to strike. Desmond entered the federal courthouse, bypassed his own office, and took a private elevator to the highest floor. He passed several surprised administrative assistants and pushed open the heavy oak doors leading into the office of Alistair Monroe, the United States Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. Monroe was a silver-haired legal veteran known for his political ruthlessness. He sat behind his desk drinking coffee and reviewing the morning briefing. He looked up in surprise. "Desmond, you look as though you fought a freight train. What happened to your face?" Desmond placed his leather messenger bag on Monroe's mahogany desk. "Alistair, I need an immediate leave of absence." Monroe frowned and set down his coffee. "A leave of absence? We are preparing to present the waterfront corruption case to the grand jury. You cannot simply walk away. What happened?" Desmond sat and recounted the previous evening with the detached precision of a medical examiner describing an autopsy. He explained the stop, the assault, the journey to the precinct, and the panic that followed the discovery of his credentials. By the time he finished, Monroe's face had become red with fury. He slammed one hand against the desk. "They did what to my deputy chief?" "To a citizen, Alistair," Desmond corrected him quietly. "It happened to a citizen. That citizen simply happened to be me." "I'm calling the mayor," Monroe said, reaching for the telephone. "I'm contacting the police chief. That officer's badge will be on my desk, and the FBI will open a civil rights investigation." "No," Desmond said firmly. Monroe paused. "If you do that, it becomes a political favor," Desmond continued. "It becomes a private firing arranged behind closed doors to satisfy the United States Attorney's Office. The department learns nothing, the public sees nothing, and another black man wearing a hoodie will be slammed against a wall tomorrow." Monroe's hand remained above the telephone. "What is your strategy?" "I am stepping away from my federal responsibilities to eliminate any conflict of interest. I will retain private counsel and sue the city, the police department, and Randall Keene for an amount so devastating that the municipality will have no choice but to accept a federal consent decree and rebuild its patrol division." Monroe leaned back as a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Who are you hiring?" Soon afterward, Desmond sat inside the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Dominic Harrow. Harrow was among the most feared civil rights attorneys on the East Coast. He had recovered hundreds of millions of dollars from corrupt municipalities and possessed a flair for dramatic media strategy. "They made a mistake of biblical proportions," Harrow said as he paced the room, energized by the details. "We file under federal civil rights law. We allege false arrest, excessive force, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I want the systemic problems addressed," Desmond warned. "This cannot be only about money." He leaned forward. Keene was too confident. He lied in the arrest report without hesitation. That means he has done it before, and his supervisors have approved those reports before. "We will tear open their internal affairs records during discovery," Harrow promised. The police department had no intention of surrendering quietly. Whispers soon began appearing in the local press, orchestrated by the aggressive police union. Anonymous sources claimed that Desmond had behaved erratically, that he matched the description of a violent offender, and that the force used against him had been minimal and consistent with department policy. They were attempting to control the story. The department also claimed that Keene's body camera had malfunctioned during the initial encounter, a convenient and predictable explanation. They did not know that Desmond was already several moves ahead. While department officials struggled to coordinate their statements, Desmond hired a private investigator who immediately delivered a preservation notice to the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. The police had forgotten about the Route 66 bus. When the bus arrived at the stop, its high-definition forward-facing security camera had captured a clear and brightly illuminated view of the entire shelter. After the recording was secured, Dominic Harrow held a press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse. Every major news network attended. Microphones crowded the podium. Desmond stood behind Harrow in a pristine navy suit, his expression calm and unreadable. A distinguished federal prosecutor was treated like a violent animal merely because he stood at a bus stop, Harrow declared. "The police union has repeatedly misled the public. They claim that Mr. Carrington behaved aggressively. They claim the officer's body camera failed. They claim the force was justified." A predatory smile appeared on Harrow's face. He pointed toward a large television monitor beside the podium. "We do not need their supposedly broken body camera. We have the truth." Harrow started the recording. The high-definition transit video played before the assembled press. There was no audio, but the images were devastating. The recording showed Desmond standing peacefully, with his hands visible. It showed Keene attacking without provocation. It captured the violent impact against the glass. Most importantly, it demonstrated Desmond's complete compliance and Keene's uncontrolled aggression. Gasps spread through the crowd of reporters. Camera shutters fired in a deafening wave. "Today," Harrow announced, raising his voice above the noise, "we are filing a $4.7 million civil rights lawsuit against the city, the police department, and Officer Randall Keene." He looked directly toward the cameras. We are also formally requesting that the Department of Justice investigate this department's systemic and racially discriminatory policing practices. The trap had not merely closed, it had broken the department's credibility in half. The legal war had begun. When the recording appeared on national news, it acted like a match dropped into gunpowder. The dispute transformed from a local controversy into a national scandal. The city's crisis management firm became overwhelmed, while the police union's aggressive statements disappeared almost immediately after the transit video reached the public. Public outrage, however, was only the opening attack. The decisive confrontation occurred months later inside the sterile, glass-paneled conference room of Harrow's downtown law office. It was time for sworn depositions. Across the long mahogany table sat Graham Voss, the city's chief litigator. Voss was intelligent, practical, and highly experienced at containing disasters created by reckless police officers. But as he looked across the table at Dominic Harrow and the stone-faced Desmond Carrington, he knew he had not come to win. He had come to limit the damage. Officer Randall Keene sat beside him. Keene appeared to have aged dramatically since the incident. He had been placed on unpaid administrative leave following the press conference and stripped of his badge and firearm. His gray suit fit poorly, his face was pale, and his eyes moved nervously around the conference room. Whenever he looked toward Desmond, he quickly turned away. Desmond sat with his hands folded, watching Keene with the cold, unwavering focus of a hawk circling injured prey. A court reporter waited at the head of the table, her fingers positioned over the stenography machine. "State your name for the record," Harrow began, adjusting his glasses. "Randall Andrew Keene," the officer mumbled. "Speak loudly enough for the reporter," Harrow instructed. For hours, Harrow guided Keene through the smallest details of his career, training, and conduct during the arrest. His questions were surgical, slowly trapping the officer inside contradictions created by his own sworn reports. "Officer Keene," Harrow said, removing a document from a thick folder, "your official report states that you approached Mr. Carrington because he perfectly matched the description of a suspect connected to several residential burglaries. Is that correct?" "Yes," Keene answered defensively. "Dispatch issued a bulletin for a tall black man wearing dark winter clothing. And you believe Mr. Carrington, who was standing at a clearly marked public bus stop reading his phone, was actively fleeing from a burglary?" "I had reasonable suspicion to conduct an investigative stop," Keene recited. The answer had clearly been rehearsed with the city's attorney. Harrow smiled. He removed a thick stack of certified documents bound beneath a blue legal cover and pushed it across the table. "Exhibit C, Mr. Voss, please review it." Voss opened the document with a deep frown. "Officer Keene," Harrow continued, "this is a certified transcript of the Central Dispatch communications for your district on the evening in question." Keene swallowed. The conference room suddenly seemed heavy and airless. "According to this record," Harrow said, "another patrol unit apprehended the actual burglary suspect before you approached my client." He continued reading. "The suspect was a teenage male wearing a bright red puffer jacket and blue jeans. Dispatch announced the arrest on the primary tactical channel, the same channel connected to your radio. The search bulletin was formally canceled." Voss closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. The city's own police department had withheld the dispatch record from him. "Officer Keene," Harrow said, leaning across the table and lowering his voice, "you knew the suspect had already been captured. You knew the bulletin had been canceled. You had absolutely no legal justification for approaching my client." His eyes hardened. "You did not stop him because he matched a description. You stopped him because you wanted to harass a black man in a hoodie who had the audacity to stand inside your patrol area. Isn't that correct?" "I didn't hear the radio transmission," Keene stammered as sweat formed above his lip. "There was noise. The radio volume must have been low." "The volume was low?" Harrow responded immediately. He produced another document. "Then how did you respond to a status inquiry from dispatch on that same channel? You personally acknowledged that the suspect had been apprehended, Officer Keene." Harrow leaned back. "I have the audio recording." Keene's face lost all color. He turned toward Voss for assistance, but the city attorney stared silently at the table. "Let us discuss the body camera," Harrow continued without mercy. "You stated during your sworn internal affairs interview that your Axon camera malfunctioned because of the cold." "That is what happened," Keene insisted, though his voice trembled. "Technology fails." Desmond finally shifted in his chair. He leaned forward and locked eyes with Keene. The contempt in his expression caused the officer to shrink visibly. "Officer Keene," Harrow said, "we subpoenaed the equipment metadata directly from the body camera manufacturer." He placed another document on the table. "The camera did not short circuit. It did not suffer a battery failure." Harrow paused. Immediately before you exited the cruiser and assaulted my client, the camera was manually powered down. The power button was deliberately held until the device disengaged. The revelation seemed to remove the air from the room. This was spoliation of evidence, intentional destruction. The matter was no longer limited to civil liability. It now involved potential federal criminal conduct. You turned it off, Harrow said. It was a statement, not a question. You turned it off because you knew what you intended to do and you did not want anyone to see it. His gaze sharpened. You simply failed to anticipate that the transit bus would arrive and record everything. Objection, Voss said weakly. Counsel is harassing the witness. The objection carried little meaning during a deposition. I am finished, Harrow said, slamming the folder closed. He looked toward the city attorney. Mr. Voss, I recommend a recess. You and your client have several devastating realities to consider. As Harrow and Desmond prepared to leave, Desmond stopped beside the door. He looked back at Keene, who was trembling uncontrollably. His career, liberty, and reputation had collapsed during a single deposition. I warned you, Desmond said quietly. You had no idea what you had done. The city's defense collapsed completely. Soon afterward, Mayor Everett Langston requested an emergency mediation session. The municipality faced a financial and public relations catastrophe. If Harrow presented the dispatch records, body camera metadata, and transit video to a federal jury, the damages could rise far beyond the original demand. A jury might award tens of millions of dollars simply to punish the department. The mediation occurred inside a neutral arbitration facility overlooking the harbor. Mayor Langston, Police Chief Nolan Prescott, and Graham Voss sat on one side of the table. Desmond and Harrow sat on the other. The mayor looked exhausted. Mr. Carrington, Mr. Harrow, the city is prepared to accept responsibility, Langston began. What happened was disgraceful. He folded his hands. We are offering a tax-free settlement of $1.5 million, provided that the parties sign a standard non-disclosure agreement. We want to make this right and move forward. Dominic Harrow did not look at his notes. He simply turned toward Desmond. For the first time during the mediation, Desmond spoke. Mayor Langston, he said, his calm voice carrying the unquestionable authority of a deputy chief federal prosecutor, allow me to explain your position. He leaned forward. You are not purchasing my silence. You will not conceal this incident through a small payment and a confidentiality agreement. Desmond's eyes remained fixed on the mayor. I am a sworn officer of the United States Department of Justice. My duty is to the law, not to the limitations of your municipal budget. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. These are my terms. They are not negotiable. Voss picked up the document. His eyes widened as he read it. First, Desmond continued, the financial compensation will be exactly $4.7 million, not $1 less. Second, Officer Randall Keene will be terminated immediately for cause, ending his right to receive a municipal pension. Third, Captain Preston Mallory and Sergeant Vernon Pike will be compelled to retire because of their supervisory failures and the falsification of public records. Chief Prescott shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Carrington, we cannot simply dictate union pension terms. I strongly recommend that you find a way, Chief, Desmond interrupted, because otherwise my final condition will take effect. The room became silent. I will deliver the complete, unredacted discovery file from this case to the FBI's Civil Rights Division. His voice turned colder. I will personally ensure that investigators open a pattern or practice inquiry into the precinct and the wider department. Desmond continued without hesitation. The federal government will place your police force under a consent decree. Federal monitors will control hiring, termination, training, discipline, and major budget decisions for years. He held the police chief's gaze. You will lose control of your own department. The threat remained in the air like a weapon. A federal consent decree was the nightmare every mayor and police chief feared. It meant enormous compliance costs, constant monitoring, and the loss of institutional independence. Desmond was not merely threatening financial consequences. He possessed the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear weapon. $4.7 million, Mayor Langston whispered as he stared at the document. That represents most of our discretionary funding. Then I recommend that you spend future discretionary funding teaching patrol officers about the Fourth Amendment, Desmond replied coldly. Silence stretched across the room. Finally, Mayor Langston picked up a silver pen, removed the cap, and signed the agreement. It was over. The consequences followed quickly and without mercy. The city publicly announced the historic $4.7 million settlement. There was no non-disclosure agreement. Every term became part of the public record. Randall Keene was fired. Federal prosecutors later indicted him for deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice connected to the deliberate manipulation of his body camera. Keene eventually pleaded guilty rather than face trial. He received a federal prison sentence and lost his badge, his freedom, and his pension. Captain Mallory and Sergeant Pike submitted retirement papers and disappeared from public view, their reputations permanently damaged. The precinct was dismantled and rebuilt. Its leadership was replaced by reform-minded officers who understood the devastating consequences of federal oversight. As for Desmond Carrington, the $4.7 million settlement was placed inside a trust. He donated $2 million to a legal defense fund that provided skilled representation to marginalized citizens who had experienced police brutality. He retained the remainder. Later, Desmond returned to the federal courthouse. He rode the elevator upstairs, walked past the administrative staff, and entered his office. His tailored Tom Ford suit fit perfectly. The heavy gold Department of Justice badge rested securely inside his pocket. He sat behind his desk, opened a new case file, and picked up his pen. Desmond Carrington was still the deputy chief of the violent crimes section, and he still had an enormous amount of work to do. His story is a chilling reminder of how quickly authority can become abuse when officers believe no one is watching. Randall Keene believed he had found an easy victim, someone whose rights he could violate without consequences. He learned that accountability can arrive from the most unexpected place. It is a powerful lesson about understanding your rights, maintaining your dignity, and forcing a broken institution to answer for its actions. If this legal battle for justice made your blood boil and your heart race, press the like button, share this video with anyone who believes in accountability, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories.